Welcome back, and back to our special focus today on eNCA. Justice delayed is justice denied. This is especially apt when you consider the DNA backlog that continues to plague our national forensic labs. It's led to many gender-based violence cases being dismissed due to a lack of evidence. For more, I'm joined by Vanessa Lynch from DNA for Africa. Vanessa, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. So last September, that backlog stood at nearly 250,000. We're focusing on gender-based violence tonight. Talk to me about the impact this has on these cases.
Thanks. Good evening. The reason that we say justice delayed is justice denied is that often if you don't have the DNA evidence presented timeously in court, those cases get kicked out with the result that that particular offender, who is probably a serial offender, is released and obviously is able to assault again. So it's very important to identify serial offenders at a much earlier stage and before they're being released. We hear too often of cases where the particular person who's been arrested is again arrested for another offence. And that is why it is so critical to get through that backlog and identify these offenders to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, and last week, the Portfolio Committee on Police unanimously adopted the Forensic Procedures Amendment Bill. What does that mean in terms of how things are going to change and work and how this will benefit the justice system going forward?
Well, unfortunately, the one thing it will do is will mean that there will be more cases to be sampled, because now convicted offenders have to be sampled before they're released. And it's a great step that's been taken by Parliament, and we really do welcome it. The only good thing about this is that a reference sample, which is a very simple cheek swab, is a much quicker and more rapid process. So that's not where the delays are being caused necessarily in the forensic DNA laboratories. And hopefully they will also enter into public-private partnerships with other laboratories that have the capacity to assist the Forensic State Laboratory. But it will just mean that convicted offenders who have been convicted on unrelated cases could still be linked to unsolved cases by virtue of that forensic DNA profile having been collected from a crime scene being on the DNA database. So it is good to see that although the backlog is still very large, that there are steps being taken by the government to try and identify serial offenders through these particular processes.
It's been a long time, though, right? Because I know you've been part of the campaign fighting for people in prison to actually get these DNA tests before they're released for a long time. And we're finally seeing movement in that regard. But with a backlog that's so large and now more pressure being added into the system, do you think we're going to see justice fast-tracked at all? Because we were talking about justice delayed is justice denied. So in terms of fast-tracking this, is that going to happen at all?
The laboratories are definitely improving in terms of reducing the backlog, but remember that we are receiving cases in addition to the backlog that already exists. They are building another laboratory in the Eastern Cape, but that only is due to be finished in 2023. So we have to commend the government for taking steps to try and redress this issue. It should never have happened in the first place, and we have to keep putting pressure on government to first of all ensure that funding is always available for the Forensic Science Laboratory to maintain the equipment, to purchase the consumables in order to ensure that processing is done on a continuous basis, because this should never have happened in the first place. And secondly, we have to look at more laboratories to assist the state laboratories. We only have 2 functional laboratories in this country. Most administrations throughout the world do use private laboratories to assist with their capacity. And it's something we've been calling for quite a while now. And I do think it's time that university laboratories, private laboratories are able to tender for business in order to help, especially with the simple reference samples, to ensure that the situation is redressed as quickly as possible. So there is hope, but we have to keep lobbying government to ensure that the pressure is kept up.
Yeah, which is sad that has to happen in order for us to actually see change being brought about, isn't it? So there are many NGOs and organizations that are actually assisting police and the justice system when it comes to dealing with gender-based violence in this country. We've heard about organizations going to help police officers in processing people who come forward with claims that they have been abused, etc. What can you do as DNA for Africa to assist in this regard?
I think the NGOs are wonderful, and I think you raise a very good point that this is a holistic issue. It's not just something that is resolved just because the government has a backlog, then everything else fails. We have to see this as everybody playing a part. So DNA for Africa, we offer our expertise in terms of helping find solutions towards addressing the backlog. We need more transparency. We need the government to put a dashboard in place, for instance. So we call for those measures to ensure that accountability is in fact in place. We would like to see more, as I said, partnerships in order to assist with capacity. For instance, the health department, maybe the pathology services can also assist the government. We also would like to continue to see innovations taking place. For instance, I know that the CODIS, which is an incredible software solution that's offered free of charge by the FBI, still after I think it's almost 10 years, hasn't been implemented. And this has incredible capacity in terms of running a forensic DNA database. So these are the kind of issues that we like to highlight and continue to put pressure on the government to say, we can still do better. Even though we are moving in the right direction, we can do better in order to assist. Saying that we've identified an offender for 60 rapes, we should be embarrassed about that. We've allowed that person who we could have identified in the first place to go on and commit 60 more rapes. We need to stop this much earlier on. And I really do commend all of the organizations that are putting themselves forward to highlight this issue and continue to place pressure to ensure that the situation is hopefully ultimately resolved.
Okay, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. That was Vanessa Lynch from DNA for Africa.